sixth NBA championship, and it's their second three-peat.
I would hate to be a Bulls fan today.
Rose came down bad on his left foot.
Derrick Rose is a sports tragedy, in my view.
It just doesn't mean enough for guys around here to want to win ball games.
You're a clown, buddy.
Back in the 90s, there was no one NBA franchise that was more revered than the Chicago Bulls. Not only did they have the greatest player of all time on their team, but they had surrounded him with a flawless supporting cast. Michael Jordan's Bulls went on to famously win 6 championships with 2 three-peats. It was one of the most successful stretches of winning basketball ever, and it cemented the Bulls as a legendary franchise. Who would have thought that 30 years later, this same organization would now be known as nothing more than a mediocre train wreck? It's almost like they made a deal with the devil, offering the achievements of the 90s in exchange for perpetual misery afterwards. The problem all these years hasn't been a lack of talent on their team. They've had plenty. The problem is an inability to properly utilize that talent. The reasoning behind that varies from front office incompetence to just plain bad luck. So what poor decisions have they made over the years that have cemented them as the most depressing team in the league? Well, the trouble started once MJ left. Following Michael Jordan's retirement in 1999, the Bulls were immediately left in a tough position. In just a few months, Chicago went from a feared dynasty to a team with a bunch of nobodies. From 1999 till 2008, the Bulls had the second worst record combined out of any team in the league. It all stemmed from horrible decision making with a bit of misfortune. Whether it was prematurely trading players who would evolve into stars when they left the Bulls, or being hit with an unlucky tragedy when a motorcycle accident tragically ended the playing career of their second overall pick, Jay Williams, or even skipping out on Kobe Bryant because they didn't want to trade Luol Deng. Incompetence through the mid-2000s was the Bulls' specialty. However, this temporary string of mediocrity would be put to an abrupt end during the spring of 2008. The 33-win Bulls, with a 1.7% chance of getting the top pick, shockingly won the lottery. Hometown kid Derrick Rose was selected, ushering in a new era of Chicago Bulls basketball. Not only did the roster change, but the front office did too. The infamous pairing of John Paxson as vice president of basketball operations and Gar Forman as general manager was put together just 1 year later in 2009. Often referred to as Garpax by Bulls fans, these two are remembered infamously as the men that destroyed the Bulls. Sure, nowadays they may be known as the idiots that let Jimmy Butler go, or Paxson as the unprofessional fool who put his head coach in a chokehold in 2010. But before all the assaults, terrible contracts, and bad trades, the Bulls were putting together an impressive team. They took full advantage of Derrick Rose's talent, surrounding him with a strong supporting cast in his first few years. Players like Joakim Noah, Luol Deng, Taj Gibson, and Carlos Boozer were all useful pieces that the Bulls scouted well in drafts or traded for. Their hiring of Tom Thibodeau in the summer of 2010 was a fantastic move too. Thibs would go on to become a huge success, instilling a tough defensive mentality that the Bulls would be revered for. Rose's first 2 years were first-round exits to superior teams, while year 3 saw a major breakthrough. The 2010-11 Chicago Bulls exploded onto the scene and won 62 games, earning the best record in the league. They had the perfect mix of two-way play, defensive pieces, shooters, energy guys, and tough veterans. The main attraction was none other than Derrick Rose, who earned the MVP award at just 22 years old for his spectacular season. There's a reason that Rose, who only garnered 3 All-Star appearances in his career, is remembered so fondly for his on-the-court play. It's because he was a fearless, respected leader beloved by the league, with an incredible highlight reel that captivated millions. The 2010-11 Bulls had the dream season. However, once this team ran into the Miami Heat in the 2011 Eastern Conference Finals, they got hit with a harsh reality. The Bulls were humbled by the Big Three Heat, losing in 5. LeBron James and his team were on a mission, making the Bulls look flat-out inexperienced. Luckily for Chicago, they had a ton of time to figure it out. After all, Derrick Rose was just 22, and appeared to have a long career ahead of him. Their momentum continued into a dominant 2011-12 campaign. The Bulls once again achieved the best record in the East, though it wasn't as smooth sailing as before. Derrick Rose missed 27 out of the 66 games that year due to various injuries. The way Rose often landed after driving to the rim would prove to be fatal to his lower body. It was a wacky, out of control, unsustainable style of play that the Bulls' doctors failed to address. At the time though, there was little concern, especially given the fact that the Bulls went 18-9 without Rose that season. Many predicted that this squad would dethrone LeBron and make a finals appearance. Oh, how sweet of a moment it would have been for Chicago. The hometown kid denying arch nemesis LeBron in the heat of a ring and becoming the heir to Jordan's championship throne. It was the perfect story. But as we all know, there are no guarantees in sports. And for just as quickly as a team can rise to prominence, so too can they fall into misery. Against the Sixers in Game 1 of Round 1 of the 2012 playoffs, Derrick Rose tore his ACL on a drive to the basket. It happened when the game was already decided. Rose got hurt with just 1 minute left as his team held a double-digit lead. This turned the Bulls' world upside down and changed the trajectory of their franchise forever. The 8th-seeded Sixers took advantage of injuries to Rose and Joakim Noah, beating them in 6. In the matter of seconds, the Bulls went from having one of the brightest futures in the league to pure uncertainty. And for Derrick Rose, his seemingly surefire Hall of Fame career would soon be shrouded in what-ifs. But fans didn't know this at the time. Sure, D-Rose may have been out indefinitely, but the Bulls roster was still promising. Fast forward 1 year to the summer of 2013, and the Bulls were still in an exciting spot. They may have lost again to LeBron in the 2013 playoffs, but they did win a series against the Nets in round 1 that gave their fans confidence. What stuck out most in this run was the rise of little-known 30th pick Jimmy Butler, who showed some flashes in his second season. The Bulls held their own without Rose, and had been eagerly awaiting his return. He had taken a bit longer than hoped with his ACL recovery process, but with him on the court, the team was seen as a strong contender in the East. Few expected Rose to actually be damaged long-term from his injury. If anything, a strong comeback was seen as certain. But just 10 games into the 2013-14 season, all of the confidence that MVP Rose would be back were destroyed in an instant. About a month into his triumphant return, Rose suffered a torn meniscus that ended his season. Not only did this kill the Bulls' championship hopes, but it was an even bigger blow to Rose's career. The floodgates of lower body injuries had now been opened. For the next few years, Rose would endure one of the most devastating stretches of injuries among any star ever. At this point, an uncomfortable thought began creeping into the minds of Bulls fans. Derrick Rose's future as a superstar was in jeopardy. The team managed to stay afloat without him, but got quickly dispatched by the Wizards in round 1 of the 2014 playoffs. Injuries hadn't just afflicted Rose, but Joakim Noah too. In the 2014 offseason, Noah would undergo left knee surgery. He was coming off of a career season, winning Defensive Player of the Year, but this surgery would be the end of his prime. Outside of horrible injuries, what the Bulls saw during early 2014 was that Jimmy Butler wasn't just some flash in the pan. This kid was a legit starter, with such a hard work ethic that the idea of him evolving into a star wasn't so far out of reach. Unlike Rose, Butler was a loudmouth. He held himself to a certain standard that he felt was best for winning, and if other people didn't share that same mentality, he'd have an issue with it. One of the people he had problems with was Coach Tom Thibodeau. Thibs and Butler often butted heads about his role in the offense. Not to mention, Thibs' voice in the locker room was starting to ring hollow. In the summer of 2014, many storylines were building. Rose and Noah's health, Butler's rise to stardom, and Thibs' possible firing. The following 2014-15 season would prove to be the year where all of these issues would reach their climax. They went all in the summer of 2014. They traded Yusuf Nurkic and Gary Harris, the 16th and 19th picks in the 2014 draft, for exciting young shooter and 10th pick Doug McDermott. A horrible move in retrospect, but an intriguing one at the time. In free agency, they brought in veteran big Pau Gasol for an offensive punch. In the regular season, the team won 50 games and earned the 3rd seed. Butler's stock jumped during this time, while Rose's and Noah's continued to decline due to injuries. The roster was solid, with a nice balance of shooting, defensive toughness, and depth. They weren't a perfect group by any means, but in the pathetic Eastern Conference, anything was possible. All they had to do was get past LeBron. If they did, a finals appearance was highly achievable. Get past LeBron, huh? Doesn't sound that hard to me. Ain't that right, Derek and Joe?
The end of the quarter game. Oh, yeah! LeBron with
The step back. Yes! Nice take by James. Oh, he stops.
Yeah, should be easy. The 2015 playoffs saw the Bulls finally click in terms of health. They first eliminated the Bucks in 6 with relative ease, setting up a date with the Cleveland Cavaliers. But these Cavs weren't the same team we know today. Kyrie Irving was dealing with knee issues that hurt his abilities, while Kevin Love was out for the remainder of the playoffs with a shoulder dislocation. If there was any one moment for the Bulls to finally crack an NBA Finals appearance, this was it. The Cavaliers were at their weakest. The team split both games 1 and 2, setting up a much anticipated Game 3 in Chicago that the Bulls won. It was one of the most incredible endings to a playoff game in recent NBA history. Derrick Rose won it for his team with a 3-ball that banked in at the horn. This right here was the peak of the Rose Era in Chicago. The fans were delirious, LeBron was in shock, and D Rose looked like he just saw his girl with another man in the crowd. Unfortunately, when Game 4 rolled around, the Bulls got hit with a monsoon of bad luck. For one, Pau Gasol, a key offensive player for this team, suffered a hamstring injury that sidelined him for games 4 and 5. Despite this loss, the Bulls found themselves tied with the Cavs with just a few seconds left in regulation in Game 4. And if you pay attention closely, the Bulls should have been winning. This is because once Derrick Rose hit the game-tying layup with 8 seconds left, Cavs coach David Blatt ran onto the floor to call a timeout. The only problem was he had none left. For whatever reason, Blatt didn't receive a technical foul for this. Had the refs noticed, the Bulls would have gotten a free throw and the possession, surely clinching a 3-1 lead. But instead, LeBron hit the game winner to tie the series at 2, and the rest was history. Chicago went from pure exhilaration in Game 3 to being scarred in Game 4. This finish destroyed their momentum, and they dropped the next 2 games to lose the series in 6. The Bulls fumbled their greatest chance at finally beating LeBron James, and now all hell would break loose. A few weeks after the Bulls were eliminated, coach Tom Thibodeau was fired, putting an end to one of the most successful runs in franchise history. This wasn't just any ordinary firing though, it was incredibly messy. For the year and a half before this, Thibs and the Bulls front office had constant disagreements over his coaching style. Gar Forman and John Paxson hated Thibs' pattern of placing his players under heavy minutes, and felt he should have played the young guys more. Thibodeau felt like they should have minded their own business. He had an excellent tenure in Chicago, going 255 at 139 over 5 years, but the Bulls management wasn't impressed. In fact, in their press release following the dismissal, they said he had some success with the team. Some success? Really? Labeling the 4th best record from 2010 to 2015 and a conference finals appearance as some success is wildly disrespectful. On top of this, when he was fired, the Bulls had security escort him out of the building like he was some criminal. In a public press release following the dismissal, team owner Jerry Reinsdorf said that the firing was a way to stay true to the organization's culture. It's funny, because the organization's quote-unquote culture before Thibs in the 2000s was a complete train wreck. Listen, Thibs wasn't perfect, but he was undoubtedly considered a top coach in the league at the time. Ending his tenure like this was extremely unprofessional, and a foreshadowing of what was to come with this poorly run franchise. The Bulls were in love with Iowa State coach Fred Hoiberg, and hired him a few days after Thibs' firing. Not only was he a poor coach in the NBA, but the Bulls were so infatuated with him that they valued him over their star players. More on this later. Once the 2015-16 season rolled around, the Bulls declined significantly. Jimmy Butler became far and away the best player on the team, while Derrick Rose failed to reach All-Star form. At this point, many believed that the MVP Rose of the past was simply finished due to injuries. Joakim Noah declined immensely, losing his starting position and eventually suffering a season-ending shoulder injury. The heroes of the 2010-11 Bulls were starting to fade away, which casted a spotlight on the new star. Butler was now on a max contract for the team, and with this clout came some drama. Butler called out Fred Hoiberg various times for his coaching style. He felt like the team should have been coached harder, and believed Hoiberg was far too laid back. As for his teammates, Butler reportedly didn't respect Rose's or Noah's work ethic. His mindset was that if you're one of the best players on the team, you should lead by example with hard work. Noah often had heated disagreements with Butler surrounding this. Rose felt like Butler was isolating himself from the team, pointing to the fact that Jimmy dressed in different parts of the locker room before and after games away from his teammates for whatever reason. Butler, once the 15th man on the roster, now called the shots, and that was a new uncomfortable power structure for Rose and Noah. In the end, the 2015-16 season was a disaster for the Bulls. They missed the playoffs, sending shockwaves of fear through the organization. Big changes were needed, and it started by getting rid of the two most beloved players of the generation. The team first started off by trading Derrick Rose to the Knicks one day before the 2016 draft. It marked the end of an 8-year tenure, one that had the potential to go down as legendary, but ended up being highlighted by misery. Fittingly, they let Rose's partner in crime, Joakim Noah, walk to New York as well in free agency. One would think that this was a signal it was Jimmy's team, but no, the Bulls eagerly shopped him around in the trade market. They ended up bringing him back because the packages weren't enticing enough. A few weeks later, they signed two old heads, Dwayne Wade and Rajon Rondo, to overpaid contracts. I say old heads because 1, they were old, and 2, Gar Forman said before this that the Bulls were trying to get more young and athletic following the pick of Denzel Valentine in the 2016 draft. You gotta respect just lying for no reason. In the oh-so-intelligent minds of the front office, this was their strongest attempt at building around Jimmy Butler. If he couldn't make it work, then that was all the evidence they needed that they should trade him. Unsurprisingly, a team that's best players are Jimmy, a 35-year-old Wade, Rondo, and Robin Lopez wouldn't go that far. Shocker. They won 41 games, and lost in round 1 to the Celtics as the 8th seed. This season was riddled with horrible drama from every corner of the locker room. Butler and Wade banded together as besties, and constantly called out everyone for their poor work ethic and effort, often in post-game interviews. Rondo used Instagram to fire back at them, saying that his vets back in his Boston days would never call out the team publicly. Several younger players on the team dissed Wade, saying they wanted to see him practice more. It was Wade and Jimmy versus everyone. The team meetings ultimately led to nothing being solved. Fred Hoiberg, who was a first-time NBA coach, couldn't get a hold of the locker room. The lone good moment for this team came for a short time in the 2017 playoffs. Chicago shockingly beat the number 1 seeded Celtics in both games 1 and 2, but bad luck hit the organization once again. An untimely Rondo thumb injury killed their momentum, and the Bulls lost 4 straight to get eliminated. This would mark a frustrating end not only to the season, but to the Jimmy Butler era as a whole in Chicago. He soon gave the franchise an ultimatum: me or Fred Hoiberg. When I mentioned Fred Hoiberg the first time in this video, most of you probably had to Google him because you had no idea who he was. The fact that this was even a question was hilarious, but what's even more funny is the Bulls' answer. They chose Freddie, shipping Jimmy off to Minnesota during the 2017 draft. After 6 years, Jimmy Butler was no longer a Bull. It's a move that haunts them to this day. Outside of Chicago, Butler has gone on to make multiple incredible finals runs, and has transformed himself into a superstar and future Hall of Famer. The Bulls not only traded him, but packaged the 15th pick alongside him as well. They received Zach Lavine, Chris Dunn, and the 7th pick of that year's draft, Lauri Markkanen, in return. It was seen as a mediocre package at best, though it did send the Bulls into rebuilding mode, which is exactly what their front office had been desiring. Zach Lavine was seen as a promising player, though he was recovering from a torn ACL. Dunn and Markkanen were young pieces with potential, but Dunn turned out to be a bust. After this move, they balled out Wade and waived Rondo, tearing it all down and starting over. If Bulls fans thought that the Butler and Rose era left them with discouraging feelings, then they would be in for quite the shock at what would happen next. The Bulls went from a franchise stuck in indifference to a franchise in NBA purgatory. A culture was being built in Chicago, but it wasn't a good one. It was one that normalized the front office disrespecting the longtime head coach. It was one that had fights where one Bulls player hospitalized another. It was one that traded a star player because he valued work ethic over anything else. And soon enough, it would deteriorate into a losing culture where the team wouldn't achieve the playoffs for 4 straight hopeless seasons. Why did the losing extend for so long? The answer lies in incompetence. First, let's go over the list of all the positives with this team from 2017 to 2021. Zach Lavine. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, what were the negatives? Following Fred Hoiberg's unsurprising firing in December 2018, Jim Boylan, often referred to as Egghead or Clown by Bulls fans, was hired. To get you an understanding of this guy, just a few days after he was brought in, the Bulls suffered a 56-point loss. He was called one of the worst coaches in NBA history by many during his year and a half in charge. His offensive schemes were horrible. The players had no respect for him. He made 0 in-game adjustments. He was notoriously terrible with his use of timeouts. And man, were some of the things he said just flat out dumb. Bulls fans were kicking and screaming for him to be fired the moment he stepped into the position. But the front office backed this guy all the way to the end. Speaking of management, they made some foolish mistakes too. The drafting of Kobe White in 2019 turned out to be a dud. They traded for Otto Porter in early 2019, an injury-prone role player who was making upwards of $27 million a year. That was bad. They failed to develop their lottery picks like Wendell Carter Jr. and Lauri Markkanen, both of whom have gone on to be great players with their respective teams. Basically, the Bulls sucked. And the worst part was, they were just good enough to disqualify themselves from getting a top 3 draft pick each year, so they were floating around in the middle of NBA purgatory. Soon enough though, change finally occurred.
Do you have confidence that your GM can get you the help you need?
They might speak differently, man, but I'm with the team, man. I gotta put the team first. They're terrible, man. I gotta put the team first, but it's just the situation we're in right now.
Stop.
In 2020, the Bulls fired the duo of Garpax along with Jim Boylan. Finally, the team was free! Arturas Karšinovas as executive and Billy Donovan as coach replaced them. Aside from having a cool name, Karšinovas had goals of bringing the Bulls back to their contending ways of the past, and immediately went to work. In March of 2021, the Bulls made their first blockbuster move in years. They acquired all-star center Nikola Vucevic in exchange for Wendell Carter Jr. and 2 first-round picks. The Magic may have fleeced them in the long run, ending up with strong young pieces in Franz Wagner, Jed Howard, and Wendell. But hey, the rebuild was over, and the Bulls were shooting for the stars. The 2021 offseason saw them take this idea to the next level, bringing in a plethora of exciting players. They used their cap space to sign Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, and Alex Caruso, along with drafting Steele's second-round pick Ayo Dosunmu. In just a few months, the Bulls revitalized their franchise. DeMar DeRozan was an all-star and elite wing. Lonzo Ball was a young, exciting point guard with incredible playmaking and defense, all things that the team really needed. Caruso and Dosunmu were defensive guards that brought energy. Lost in all of this excitement was the Bulls trading Lauri Markkanen to Cleveland for Derrick Jones Jr. and a protected first-round pick. Markkanen would go on to become an all-star in Utah 2 years later, while Chicago was left with a role player. Still, the Bulls had built an exciting core of talent in the matter of months. They had shooters, playmakers, defenders, and most importantly, dogs. The hopes for them were modest initially, but once the 2021-22 season started, they blew those expectations out of the water. The Bulls shocked their fans, jumping out as a top Eastern Conference team immediately. Their brand of basketball was so much fun. Their games were filled with countless fast break dunks and flashy dimes. Gone were the days of Egghead and Garpax. The Bulls were exciting again. This stretch of elite play continued from October to January, where they held the #1 seed in the East for as long as 3 weeks straight. Not everything went right for this franchise over the last 11 years. Tons of unluckiness came their way. At the same time though, many of their problems are self-inflicted. When looking at all of the talented players who came through the organization in the grand scheme of things since 2010, you'd expect way more than a combined 1 Eastern Conference Finals appearance. But that's all they got. Time and time again, they let talent slip out of their fingertips. Their scouting was mediocre. In only 1 draft between 2012 and 2016 did they pick up a useful player. Everyone else was a bust. They failed to hire effective coaching, and the only guy they did hire that proved to be worthwhile was humiliated on his way out. It's no wonder that the Chicago Bulls are called the most depressing team in the league nowadays. It's just all part of the deal in which they sold their soul for Michael Jordan.